Hi, guys. We are picking up on chapter 20 of Leave No Trace. We're about 60% of the way through the book, so I'm going to read a couple more chapters this afternoon, starting on chapter 20. The next day at work, while I led a new group session with four nonverbal women, Lucas tried to escape again. We were doing deep breathing exercises and humming out our breath, or at least I was, and maybe one patient. The other three sat in their wheelchairs, staring at the walls. Hard to blame them. Staring vacantly at the walls was pretty much what I'd done all night after getting home to a dark house and Dad's closed bedroom door. He'd already left by the time I got up this morning, but there was a note on the counter next to a paper bag. The note said, "Going out for one last run at the Bannock Burn. Maybe we'll get lucky this time." I opened the bag and found copper-plated drawer handles, polished on the edges and shimmering with deep mahogany and streaks of gold. She would love them if she ever came back. I stopped humming and looked around at the group. It doesn't get better, does it? I glanced from face to wrinkled face, searching for any hint of reaction. Their expressions sagged, unresponsive. Only one woman, the one who had been breathing with me, met my eyes. Tears leaked out of hers, but she didn't look away. She kept breathing, the exaggerated deep inhale that lifted her shoulders, and then hummed the air out in a noise that turned to a lament, her tiny soprano ode to sorrow. I crouched in front of her wheelchair and held her hands. Maybe coming here was your only way out. The tears fell silently off her chin. Her fingers rustled underneath mine like little birds in a cage. Let's just breathe. And that's how the attending day nurse found me, kneeling in front of a crying woman as we whistled our breath in and out together. "Maya, your boyfriend's trying to escape again." Jesus Christ. I shot up and out of the ward, shouting at the nurse to help the woman back to their rooms. I ran down a flight of stairs and sprinted through a vacant corridor of offices. As I neared Ward 2, a thought almost sent me stumbling. Whose side was I on? The badge slapped against my thigh was a Congdon badge. I was a Congdon employee, here to rehabilitate and protect patients, especially from themselves. But everything in me wanted to find Lucas and keep running. Just as the realization hit, two orderlies rushed out of another stairwell, and the three of us barreled through the door into the high security men's ward. A crowd of people had gathered at the far end of the ward near an emergency exit, crushing any impulse I had to do something crazy. As I slowed to a walk, I noticed nurses kneeling in the center of the huddle, and a surge of fear shot through my chest. "What happened?" I elbowed my way to the front. "Who's hurt?" I believed that would be me. Blood covered the side of Dr. Mita's head, dripping from a place in her hair where one of the nurses applied a compress. I scanned the bodies, searching for any sign of Lucas. "Get out of here, Maya." But my attention snapped back to Dr. Mita. "You don't have clearance for this ward. Go." The rest of them shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me, then away. The two orderlies who'd arrived with me worked their way through the crowd to the emergency exit. Had Lucas gotten that far? Was he gone? I took a step toward the exit, but Dr. Mita's look stopped me. Even with blood streaks smeared over her face, sprawled in the middle of the linoleum floor, she still managed to impart that shrinking, piercing stare, like she knew exactly what I'd been thinking. I swallowed and nodded, withdrawing from the crowd, and walked slowly back down the hall. After my shift ended, I pretended my sprained ankle was hurting again and went to the medical ward where the gossipy nurses reigned. One of them set me up on a bed and examined the bone while the others filled us in, peppering the story with knowing glances in my direction. By now, everyone had heard about the incident on the boat and my demotion. According to Stan, all he would say during his session was, "I have to go find my father." Nothing else? Nope. Totally silent after that. Wouldn't answer any questions about where his father is so other people could, like, actually go look for him. Only glared at Dr. Mita and stared out the window. He won't even talk to Carol when she brings him meals. And you know he used to ask her about other people a lot. Nurse Valerie, the information queen, pointedly ignored me as she parted with this tidbit. I kept my expression neutral, focusing on the narrow bone boxed in one of the other nurse's hands. So, when Dr. Mita tries to give him a book, the kid bashes Stan over the head with it and takes Dr. Mita hostage. The other nurse wasn't even pretending to examine me anymore. She gasped, putting a hand over her mouth. He got a lot farther without this little firecracker. Nurse Valerie nodded toward me, around to stop him. He handcuffed Stan to a table, took his badge, and forced Dr. Mita through the ward to that emergency exit that leads out to the parking lot. But the nurses' station saw him right away, and the guards met him at the door. He literally threw Dr. Mita at them and took off, fell down a flight of stairs, and kept going until three of them tackled him at the main door. I closed my eyes. The guilt doubled and redoubled as I sat on the hospital bed, oblivious to the continued chatter of the nurses around me. Where is he now? I asked, opening my eyes to look around. Doesn't he need medical treatment? Dr. Mita wouldn't let him be treated here. The nurse was wrapping my perfectly healthy ankle, replied, glancing up with a smug look, like she thought it was obvious I'd come to the ward to see him. Nurse Valerie piped back up. I've been given clearance to visit him 3 times a day in his isolation room, where he is in full restraints, mind you, to administer pain medication and check for infection and swelling. That is, until I leave for my Cancun trip. Her voice turned gloating, and one of the other nurses groaned. Do you have to rub it in? Nurse Valerie glanced at me and seemed to soften a fraction, answering the unspoken question. No serious injuries this time. His right side is going to look like a burger patty, but luckily the shoulder didn't get any more damage. I put it in another sling, just as a precaution. Don't worry, she patted my bandaged ankle. Sounds like that kid's got stamina, but you'd know better than us, right? The other nurses snorted, ducking their heads. I felt my face flush as I swung my legs around and put my weight gingerly on the bad ankle, shrugging into my coat. He's only on pain meds? She nodded as she turned away. Tylenol 3 times a day. I thanked them for the wrap and pretended to favor the leg as I left the ward. Everyone knew the definition of insanity. Lucas had tried to escape from Congdon 3 times now. 3 episodes of the same behavior, expecting different results. How many more attempts would it take? How many crawling days and nights in isolation? How many times could he beat his head against the wall before his mind started to crack? Before he became what everyone thought he already was. A string of storms raced across Superior and slammed into Duluth over the next few days, bringing blinding lake-effect snow squalls that buried the city, while only a few miles west the ground remained brown and bare. Dr. Mita hadn't gotten any updates from the Forest Service rangers, and I could tell she was getting tired of me asking. I hibernated in the house after work, spending half my nights on the internet. The backlash against the protesters who chased us down at the Twin Ponds had helped some new voices rise on social media, people calling for Lucas's privacy, to let the system help him, and focus public efforts on finding Josiah instead. I looked up Boundary water maps, sometimes scrolling the satellite images to the tiny break in the green that showed the roof of my mother's cabin. Other nights I Googled everything I could find on Heather Price. Her life, the scant details of her death, a drug addict's death, apparently, was even less noteworthy than a mental health patient's. Society turned away, pretended the body had never been a person. No one demanded to know how she'd gotten the blow to her head. I found a small, archived post on the website of the dentist office where she'd worked, offering the usual thoughts and prayers to a family who didn't seem to exist, and the only person who might know more had disappeared from the known world. After half a week, the snow stopped, and the gales began tossing it around the city, whipping drifts of white over the streets, tearing at anyone who braves the cold. I left work one day, and the wind picked up the tails of my jacket, invaded my hood, and froze my earrings the second I muscled open the security door. I jogged toward the parking lot, intent only on getting to my car and starting the heater, before stopping dead in the middle of the sidewalk. Lucas, 2 orderlies, and Nurse Valerie were walking in the side yard near the therapy garden. Lucas was restrained in a full straitjacket with an orderly holding each arm. His head lifted to one side, and he stared dully at the flakes whipping along the ground. Even from 20 yards away, it was obvious he was drugged. His movements were sluggish and awkward, reeking of a massive dose of some life-sucking, behavior-correcting prescription cocktail. It looked like Nurse Valerie was trying to hurry them back inside, but Lucas could barely put one foot in front of the other until he saw me. His eyes wandered over the sidewalk and roamed up my body like I was just another static figure in the landscape. A moment passed when it didn't even seem like he recognized me until he blinked and jerked upright. Maya. I saw his mouth form my name even though no sound came out. He lurched forward, throwing his handlers off balance, and tried to close the distance between us. Confused by his sudden mood change, Valerie put a hand out to steady him before she turned and saw who he was trying to reach. She snapped back around and said something to the orderlies, who abruptly stopped walking and grabbed Lucas, preventing him from moving. Lucas struggled, but he was no match for the combination of the straitjacket, two burly orderlies, and whatever chemicals they pumped into him. Thrashing in place, he mouthed my name until he finally managed to work the ragged sound out of his throat, and he reached me the only way he could. Maya, help, Maya, Maya, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Tears started to run down his face. Don't leave me here, please, Maya, please. Nurse Valerie stepped in front of Lucas, blocking him from my sight, and gestured to the parking lot. Go on. Dr. Mita's orders state that he can't have any contact with you. I couldn't move, even as the wind slapped my cheeks and stung needles into my fingers. I forgot where I'd been going. Lucas dragged one of the orderlies a step forward, bumping into Valerie. Go, she pointed to the cars, trying to keep her hood from flying off with her other hand. We're going to freeze out here if we don't blow away first. It took strength I didn't even know I possessed to walk toward the parking lot. Lucas's voice grew weaker and weaker before dying away in the wind, and I didn't know if he stopped calling my name because the group had gone inside or because he'd lost all hope. I didn't turn around to check. By the time I climbed inside my car, I was shaking. Snowflakes clung to the ends of my hair, and my hands were red and raw. I stared at Congdon's brick walls and barred windows rising like a fortress out of the angry white blur of the gales, and everything became suddenly clear as the sun-soaked sky over the lake, as clear as a bag of carefully chosen hardware, as clear as the layers of an agate, sliced and gleaming in my mother's hand. I knew what I had to do. I had to rescue Lucas Blackthorne. Chapter 21. Stealing a patient from a psychiatric facility is a little harder than your basic B&E. Congdon had multiple layers of security, beginning with the outside gates where a guard was posted 24 hours a day, and the 10-foot-tall iron fence enclosing the rest of the property. Then there was the building itself. Every exterior door locked from both sides and could only be opened with a security badge, except the main entrance, where visitors passed through metal detectors and checked in with another taser-armed guard before being escorted to the appropriate room. Each floor and ward had their own entrances with their own electronic security. Not every badge opened every door, and if you happened to be trying to kidnap someone from an isolation room, no badge would work. The entrances to each seclusion unit opened with individual keys, which were only held by the attendants on duty or the night security staff. Cameras in every hallway fed video back to the guard desk at the main entrance. If an emergency was spotted, like, say, someone trying to make off with a high-security patient, they could hit a button that would deadlock all doors, trapping everyone inside until the lockdown was lifted. That was getting in. Smuggling the patient out and figuring out how to get as far away as possible without drawing attention was the other obstacle. People tended to notice stumbling mental health patients in straitjackets, even when they weren't celebrities. For 3 days, I planned the rescue, making lists and detailed plans before burning the pages immediately afterward. It had to be a night job, when the staff levels were the lowest. I began staying late after my shifts to catch up on paperwork, and then stopped to chat with a front desk guard on my way out. pretending to be outraged at the rumors flying around about me while watching the security monitors and the pattern of the night rounds. Jason, the guard, had apparently been accused of sexual harassment once and was sympathetic in a way that made me immediately want to shower. On the third day, he told me he got off at 11 and had a growler with my name on it. We could watch Netflix and chill. I told him no thank you, marking the end of my first attempt at friendship. All in all, I called it a success. The supplies I'd bought for the original search party were still piled in a vacant office in the administrative area, including extreme weather tents, sub-zero sleeping bags, and most important of all, the locked, waterproof box filled with a random buffet of medicine: antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, cortisol steroids, every broad-spectrum pill or shot that might have provided Josiah the emergency care he needed. When we'd been prepping for the search, I'd bought the box so the associate psychiatrist could fill it and dutifully secure it with a master number 3 padlock, universally acknowledged as the easiest lock on the planet to pick. And, as an added bonus, the building's security cameras were only used in patient wards. Over my 3 days of planning Lucas's rescue, I exchanged ward bedding for sleeping bags, Advil for steroids, swapping items so the gear appeared intact, and smuggling the supplies out one by one in the backpack I always brought to work. On my next day off, Jasper and I took a longer than usual walk. We headed north out of Lincoln Park and started climbing the hill into nicer neighborhoods until we reached a 2-story Victorian with window boxes full of spruce branches and an honest-to-God porch swing with the snowflake printed decorative pillows arranged on it. Rounding the block, we doubled back through the alley. I stopped near the house's garage, pretending to pick up some dog poop while checking for motion in the house, and then we slipped inside the gate and around to the side door. Houses in Duluth were built so close together that only the next-door neighbors could have seen me working on the lock, and luckily, their blinds were closed. I hadn't used my lock-picking skills in 8 years, and it wasn't exactly like riding a bike, but luckily, I'd saved my bump keys and the door was old. Closing my eyes, I put myself inside the lock, feeling the weights and springs, and tapping the bump with a screwdriver until the key turned. Jasper pushed ahead into a sun-soaked laundry room. I reined him in before he could get too far. "Anyone here?" I whispered. Jasper nosed the air, and we both listened, waiting for any signs of life while my heart raced. When I broke into places as a kid, I never cared about getting caught. I had nothing to lose then. Now, Lucas's mind and freedom hung in the balance, and I couldn't stop hearing his drugged, desperate voice. "Don't leave me here. Please, Maya, please." After a few minutes of total silence, I forced myself to relax and crept further into the house. It was like another world, a Martha Stewart world. Curtains with gauzy stuff at the top set off the rich colors of the walls and sleek couches. Vases, books, and art filled the built-in shelves lining every room. I thought I'd done a good job with our bathroom, but every inch of this house felt manicured. The containers in the pantry had tiny chalkboards attached to their fronts that were scrawled in handwritten cursive: red lentils, protein powder. Each drawer had an organizer, and each bin had a label. A church bulletin lay on top of an ornate-looking Bible near the fireplace. The air even smelled different here, like vinegar-dipped roses. Framed pictures of the ocean were scattered everywhere, and I paused at one sitting on top of a piano. In the picture, Nurse Valerie sat at a table with a balding man as they held up some fruity drinks. They were both sunburned and smiling in that overly wide, forced way when you hold one pose for too long. "Hey, Val." I grinned at the picture and kept moving. "Hope you and the hubs are having fun in Cancun. Nice digs, by the way. My dad might need your advice on our kitchen." I checked all the coats in the front closet, the purses in her bedroom, the kitchen drawers, even the pockets in her dirty laundry. Nothing. This was a house where everything had a place, so why couldn't I find what I was looking for? After 20 minutes of frustrated searching, I spun toward Jasper. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" The door to Valerie's detached garage was more exposed. I watched the nearby houses until I was sure no one was looking out their window. And then Jasper and I ducked into the yard with the ring of keys that was thoughtfully hung right next to the back door. In the glove box of the Chevy Malibu, I found the prize, her Congdon security badge, newly upgraded with isolation ward clearance. Aw, Valerie. I tangled the strap from one hand and watched her perky photo spin as the rope untangled. You shouldn't have. Putting the keys back in the house, I relocked the door on my way out. I was practically skipping when I opened the gate and led Jasper back into the alley until a man came out of the yard. Shit, shit. Oh, hey! I smiled and jogged over, pulling Jasper into a sharp heel at my side. Do you know Valerie? I was supposed to meet with her today. At least I think it was today. And she's not answering her phone. I scratched my temple like I was confused and made sure the stocking cap fully covered my head. As long as the maroon hair and earrings were covered, I could pass for a completely nondescript college kid, one of thousands in this town. The neighbor looked me over, not replying, and I could sense him cataloging, judging. Jasper tugged on the leash and let out a growl, making the guy back up a step. Apologizing loudly and repeatedly, I ordered Jasper to sit, and took the opportunity to duck my head, shirking away from his gaze. I glanced back at the house as if unsure I had the right one. That's Valerie's place, right? He finally spoke. She and Rick are out of town. Oh crap, she's in Cancun this week? I must have written the dates down wrong. I pulled my phone out of my jacket and pretended to check it, playing it out, waiting for him to make any wrong move. If he went for his phone or backed into his yard, I was going to have to choose between knocking him out or running. This was the first real test. Surveillance, breaking and entering, stealing. That was kids' play, literally the toys of my childhood. It hurt no one, but now this 40-something UMD bulldog sweatshirt wearing guy waffling in the back alleys of the hillside was barging into my plan. Why hadn't I stolen some jewelry or pulled out a few drawers? I could have at least made it seem like a random robbery if I was spotted, which would have sent the police in a different direction in Congdon. Breathing carefully, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and closed my fingers around a jagged rock. If all else fails, I'd been prepared to break a window to get inside. Now I prepared myself for the first innocent bystander. He seemed to ease up a bit, though, when I dropped the Cancun reference. I flashed him a self-deprecating smile. She's my mentor for this life skills program at our church, or she's trying to be anyway. I laughed, and he loosened up more, chuckling with me, a man who wasn't going to take a rock to the head. We talked for a minute as he put his trash out, until I remarked on the cold and how I didn't want Jasper's paws to freeze. Thanks for your help. I guess I'll catch up with her next week. I pulled Jasper down the rest of the alley, acting like I was checking email or something, while adrenaline flooded my chest and Valerie's security badge bounced comfortingly in my pocket against my hip. The next day I went to Congdon, prepared to kidnap Lucas. It was a strange thing, walking into your job, a place where you'd worked so hard, followed all the rules, and turned yourself inside out to be accepted as a professional, suddenly hoping that everything went to plan so you could commit a felony. The delinquent kid inside of me was on high alert, noting every detail down to the number of clouds in the sky as I drove to Congdon. I parked and came in through the front door with a large duffel bag that immediately set off the metal detectors. Hey, I unzipped a bag on the search table and nodded to the guard, who resentfully got out of his chair at the monitoring station. We're having a jam session today. Want to come up to the third floor around 3? It's going to be epic. The guard poked through the mess of tambourines, hand drums, sleigh bells, and whatever else I could find at the secondhand music store yesterday. I think I'll pass. You're lost, man. I zipped the bag back up and flung it over my shoulder, heading for the employee locker rooms. It was early enough that the night shift was still on, yawning into their sleeves and ready for the late winter sun to end their day. I nodded to a few of them, and some even acknowledged me without smirking. Walking past the lockers, I took the bag through another exit into a stairwell and jogged down to the basement. There was no badge access down here, and no video cameras as far as I could tell. So I set the duffel bag down and went to work on the lock. 20 minutes later, just as I was starting to lose hope, the catch sprung, and I swung the door open, peeking inside. A dim, open room housed a pile of miscellaneous furniture, and on either side of the mess, two hallways disappeared into blackness. I took the one leading right, mentally tracking the map of the building above me, until I got to the stairwell exit I wanted. Opening the duffel bag, I reached through to the bottom, where I'd cut the lining, pulled out the tools I needed, and tucked them behind a dusty fire extinguisher. See you in a few. Then I left the basement and started my shift. Chapter 22. Jason Housley, my fleeting front desk friend, had worked as a second shift Congdon security guard since he graduated high school 15 years ago. In the last few days, I learned he liked to sit in the break room telling anyone who would listen that he made more money than half the guys he knew who had gone to college, and no friggin' loans to pay off either, he'd add, slopping up whatever microwave meal he'd overcooked that day, and filling the room with mystery meat or fake butter smells. The picture on Jason's security badge showed a not bad looking kid trying to seem tough, probably taken a few days after he was hired. The real Jason had the shape and appeal of a rancid turkey. He was a mountainous, slack-jawed guy who'd harassed the only unmarried nurse until she threatened to go to HR, and bragged to everyone about his pristine, collector-registered Pontiac Trans Am. He mattered to no one, which made him desperate to seem as important as possible. He always carried his flashlight out when he made rounds, scraping it along every door as he puffed and sweated through each ward. After I rejected his offer of a growler and a groping, he waited for me at night as I left the building, throwing out some bizarre comment he'd no doubt been refining all day. "You're too late," he sneered from the monitor station today. "The high school let out already, so you missed all the underage boys." I didn't slow down. "I prefer undergrads, all that sexy book learning." He grunted as I left, acting offended, like it wasn't the highlight of his day. Someone actually talked to him, and today I was going to make sure of that. On Monday nights, Congdon had late visiting hours, so there were still plenty of cars in the parking lot after 5. I wove through the rows until I came to my beat-up Civic, parked right next to a shiny black Pontiac Trans Am. The guard station faced the street. The protesters had all dispersed a few days ago. No one else was coming in or out of the building, and Jason had considerately parked his collector wheels right next to a giant spruce tree that blocked the view from most of Congdon's windows. The car was backed into its spot and ready to floor it off the property. It was now or never. I pulled a tire iron out of my trunk. The nicest thing about old cars was how easily everything came apart. 6 hours later, I parked in an alley, a block away from Congdon's eastern fence. The building rose up over the top of the line of houses, a black silhouette towering at the crest of Duluth. I took a few deep breaths and stared at the outline of the institution that had given me a fresh start. Not once in my life, but twice. For the last several days, I'd obsessed over the logistics of this kidnapping, the exact sequence of events, and every tool I'd need. Ignoring the hovering cloud of my betrayal, I wasn't naive. I understood exactly what I was doing, the line I was crossing. No matter if I succeeded or failed in the next hour, the life I'd been trying to live was over. I was going to prove everyone right who whispered Dr. Mita was wrong to hire me. That once a mental health patient, always a mental health patient. The costume was gone, the show over. Just like my mother, I wondered if she'd been as sure as I was now, if she felt this thing in her core that told her she'd found a greater purpose. Maybe her abandonment of me was uninvitable as my abandonment of Dr. Mita and Congdon now. Maybe it wasn't my fault she left. I would probably never know. And I'd never know if she took a moment like I was taking now, sitting in this car at the point of no return, to face the roil of sorrow in my gut, acknowledging the emotion, like I'd been taught to do. "I'm sorry, Rhea." Dr. Mita's first name felt wrong on my tongue, and I embraced the alienness, the separation of what she'd been to me from what I had to become to her now. I shook one last giant breath from before double checking everything in my backpack and slipping out of the car. It was time. Lucas was waiting. Cutting across the block to the sidewalk that bordered Congdon's grounds, I glanced in the windows of nearby homes. Briskly, I paced to the far end of the block and checked the front gate, making sure no protesters had decided to make a reappearance, but the sidewalk in front of the guardhouse remained empty. I crept along the fence to the spot where my shoes crunched over a pile of broken glass from the street lights I'd knocked out last night. Hip hop thumped out an open window of a nearby house, but I didn't see any movement other than a lone squirrel ducking through the fence's iron bars. Pulling out a knotted length of rope from the backpack, I swung the loop side over the top of the fence and threaded the other end through, drawing it tight. I scaled easily up to the top and teetered there, carefully gripping the bars between the spikes to ease one foot over, then the other. Once I'd swung my weight over, I grabbed the rope again and scaled down the other side, noting how much time it had taken while I tucked the trailing section along the fence. If someone searched the perimeter of the grounds, they'd spot it, but to the casual observer, it blended into the shadows. I put on a full ski mask and cinched the hood up on my jacket. The gloves, baggy black sweatpants, and shoes had all been purchased at Goodwill with cash. I crept through the grounds, sticking to the trees, until I had a view of both the isolation ward and the edge of the parking lot. There were no lights in the windows of the isolation rooms, and I still didn't know the night shift's exact schedule to do their checks. But I did know when the shift changed, at exactly 11:15. After the transfer of keys and notes, Jason Housley lumbered out to his Trans Am. I crouched under the boughs of a pine, clutching Nurse Valerie's badge, and held my breath. He started the car and floored the engine, then let it idle for what felt like an hour. Jesus, what was he doing in there? I couldn't see him through the glare of the parking lights lot, and started to get nervous. Could he tell something was wrong? He hadn't hesitated before getting in the car. I edged to the far side of the tree, ready to run. When he shot out of his parking spot and gunned out of sight, I waited, listening. Sooner or later, he was going to have to turn to exit the parking lot, and sooner or later, his tires, missing all their lug nuts, were going to come barreling off his baby. The crash came seconds later, followed by an ear-splitting car alarm that jerked me into movement like the starting gun of a race. I sprinted to the emergency exit door and badged my way into an empty stairwell, ran down to the basement and opened the door I'd sealed with duct tape before my shift this morning to ensure it wouldn't latch. My tools, a hacksaw and can of spray paint, were exactly where I'd left them, behind the fire extinguisher. I grabbed them and shoved the saw into my backpack, taking the stairs two at a time until I reached the emergency exit of the men's isolation ward. I paused for a second, peering in the lead glass window as the car alarm still shrieked in the night. No one was at the desk on the far side of the ward by the main entrance. I badged in just as the car alarm stopped. The quiet was deafening. I breathed once, then pushed the door further open and slipped inside. It was impossible to tell from this angle if any patients were up and looking through their doors. Shaking the spray paint can and cringing at the noise, I aimed it at the corner of the ceiling directly above me, where a security camera was mounted to capture the entire corridor down to the main entrance. Hopefully the front desk security staff were still in the parking lot dealing with Jason's accident, and, with any luck, they'd think a black screen was a shorted out wire before coming to investigate the camera. Once I had the lens covered, I duct taped the door latch, then crossed to the main desk to see which room Lucas was in. My fingers shook as I ran them over the check sheet, finally finding his name by room 6. I had the lock pick ready as I sprinted to his door, attacking the knob and tripping myself up with the adrenaline rocking through my body. Bump keys wouldn't work on these doors. I had to pick through each individual weight and spring. There was rustling and scrapes in one of the rooms behind me. Then a broken sing-songy voice started chanting words I couldn't understand. It sounded like he had respiratory issues. A clavicle breathing pattern? I shook my head, forcing the voice out, and concentrated all my energy on the piece of metal separating me from Lucas. How much time did I have? Every second wasted was 1 second closer to failure. I couldn't hear anything inside Lucas's room. Or maybe I just couldn't hear him over the combination of the singer and the pounding of my heart. More seconds ticked by. Sweat dripped down my temples under the mask, and I started praying to the god of lockpicking, to anyone who could help me break through this door. I was running out of time. Finally, after what seemed like an hour, I popped the latch and turned the handle, pushing inside. It took a second for my eyes to adjust to the dark. When they did, I saw a body strapped to the bed in full restraints, unconscious. "Lucas," I whispered, going to work on the handcuffs, which were a walk in the park compared to the freaking door. I had both his feet free before he even blinked his eyes open. "Lucas, can you hear me?" It took him a moment to focus on me, and when he did, the ripple of fear over his face broke my heart. I paused at his left wrist and tugged the ski mask up, squeezing his hands. "Had enough of this place yet?" As soon as my face came into view, his entire body lifted and his breath caught. A strangled noise came out of his throat. "Maya," he breathed, looking at me like he was drowning, and I was the only buoy in all of Lake Superior. I swallowed a wave of emotion and smiled before pulling the ski mask back down. "Let's get the hell out of here." I opened the last of his handcuffs, which was more difficult now that he'd woken up because he started tugging against them. When I'd finally gotten them all, I unfastened the straps on the straitjacket and pulled it off him as he staggered to his feet and then fell back on the bed heavily. I boxed his head in my hands, tilting his face to the light streaming in from the corridor. His pupils were contracted, and he couldn't stop blinking. "Swallow this quickly." I handed him 2 no-dose pills from my pocket, and he ate them without question. "Can you walk?" He made himself stand up, slower this time, and inhaled slowly. "I'll crawl if I need to." "Okay, let's go." I peeked out of the room. The patient with respiratory issues had stopped singing, and there was no sign of any staff yet. Ducking into the corridor, we moved awkwardly to the emergency exit. Lucas braced one arm along the wall while I pulled him by the other. We made it through the door and down the stairwell with Lucas falling twice and me helping him back to his feet. At the bottom of the stairs, I pulled Nurse Valerie's badge out and swiped it against the electronic pad. Nothing. I tried it again, and the light turned red. Fuck. I threw my weight against the door once, but it was solid metal. "Plan B." "What's a plan B?" Lucas asked as I dragged him back up the stairs. The respiratory patient was giggling when we got back to the isolation ward. Laughter echoed down the hall and met the distant sound of walking feet. I pulled the can of spray paint out and shoved it into Lucas's hands. "Spray everything." "What?" "We need another decoy." I ran to the giggling patient's room and went to work on the lock. Now that I knew the model, it was easier to catch the spring. As soon as I opened the door, a bone-skinny white guy ran out and started making circles in the air in the middle of the corridor, singing at the top of his lungs, his shoulders heaving up and down with the effort. "Hey," I grabbed a can out of Lucas's shaking hands and tossed it to the guy. "We did this, but you have to get the rest. Can you paint the basement?" I opened the emergency exit, and he ran through it on pale, quivering legs, tottering down the stairs, and spraying a trail of paint all over the walls and himself. There was no time for the stab of regret that lanced through me. Voices came from the other direction, getting closer. "Get into bed." I pulled Lucas into his room, shutting the door behind us. "No." He struggled against the straitjacket as I tried to cover him with it. "Shut up. Do it now." I forced him back to a lying position and was tucking the handcuffs up so they didn't dangle off the sides, just as we heard the dull thud of the main ward door opening. "Oh, Jesus H. Christ." A man's voice came from the end of the corridor. Someone else replied, but I couldn't hear what they said. I crouched against the wall next to the door, fighting the panic that swelled in my throat. Lucas's breath had sped up, which meant the no-dose was starting to kick in and counteract the sleeping pills, but other than the quick rise and fall of his chest, he lay motionless on the bed with his eyes closed. The guards ran past us to the end of the corridor. "Spray paint? Are you fucking kidding me?" "Radio the desk. Check the rooms. Now." One of them called the central monitoring station while the other's footsteps came closer and closer, pausing at each room. Stride, pause, stride. I held my breath as the feet stopped outside Lucas's room. A flashlight's beam shone through the window and bounced off the bed. I could see the glare of the handcuffs clearly open, the straight jacket straps hanging loosely, and as noiselessly as possible, I pulled a utility knife out of my jacket pocket, waiting for the shout for the door to open. Here, the yell made me jerk, and the flashlight beam disappeared as quickly as it had come, but the door didn't open. Footsteps ran across the corridor in the opposite direction of Lucas's room. How the hell could he have gotten out? Crazy people, man. They do crazy shit. He must have gone this way. Come on. They hurried back to the emergency exit and into the stairwell. As soon as the door slammed shut, I sprang up and ran to the window, opening the casement and cranking it up as high as it would go. There was enough room to fit through and barely reach the bars. The bed. Lucas and I dragged it under the window, and I jumped on top, retrieving the hacksaw from the bag and starting to saw the middle bar, putting every ounce of muscle into my dad's diamond tip blade. Before I finished 4 strokes, Lucas's arms appeared on either side of me and he gripped the handle, adding his strength to mine. I felt him brace his feet wide as he leaned against me for support. Is this going to work? He asked in my ear as we frantically sawed through the bar. Diamond beats rebar, I puffed as we broke through the other side. I repositioned the saw at the top of the bar, a harder angle because of the window, but we barely got halfway through before more footsteps thundered through the stairwell. Shh! I stilled our arms and we waited, catching our breath while more guards burst into the ward and examined the spray paint damage not 30 feet away from us. All they had to do was shine a light into this room and it would be over. Hear a noise. Take 10 steps this way and send up an alarm that would condemn Lucas to this cell and send me to jail. I felt Lucas's heart race against my back as we stood frozen. Just as one of them started to come closer, they got a call over the radio. It was too muffled to hear, but then they immediately headed back into the stairwell and the ward was quiet again. Lucas and I whipped back to the window and sawed as hard and as fast as we could. We hadn't taken more than a few strokes when a light hit the side of my mask. Hey, a guard who must have stayed behind when the rest of them left pointed a flashlight through the door. He tried the knob, but I'd shut it fully, engaging the lock again. Central Station. I've got an escape attempt in Ward 4. I repeat, Ward 4, Room 6. Need immediate backup both inside and out. His shouted instructions grew disjointed as he ran down the corridor to the main desk, probably to unlock some emergency keys. There wasn't time to saw through the whole thing. I tossed the blade and pushed the partially detached bar as hard as I could to one side. The metal screeched as it slowly opened a large hole. The guard returned, still yelling for backup as he stuffed key after key in the lock. I shrugged off the backpack and shoved it through the opening. Hear it drop on the ground below. Then I turned to Lucas. You first. His glance shot to the door. Maya, go, now. There's a rope on the fence straight ahead through the trees. I braced my stance and lifted his leg. He started to climb up, pulling himself up to the ledge. But Maya, watch your landing. I pushed him forward until he fell, vanished from the window so suddenly and completely that for a second I couldn't move. He was out. I had gotten him out. The doorknob turned and footsteps rushed into the room. I pivoted on top of the bed and kicked in instinctively, catching the guard straight in the throat. He stumbled and I grabbed one of the window bars, hiking myself up and through a flood of victory of total confidence coursed through my body. I had almost cleared the sawed-off bar. Could see Lucas's shadow hunched below, waiting for me, when 2 hands grabbed my boot and pulled me sharply back and down. I screamed at the jagged stump of rebar, tore through my jacket, and gouged deep. Where do you think you're going, you? He didn't get any farther before my foot smashed into his face, sending him toppling off the bed into the desk, landing hard on the floor, ignoring the pain. I pulled myself through the opening and dangled from the ledge before dropping to the ground. At least this time I didn't sprain my ankle. I didn't see any flashlights in the grounds yet, but voices shouted near the front of the building. Lucas's hand reached through the darkness, finding mine. He pulled me up, and we moved as fast as we could toward the rows of evergreens. His gait was unmeasured, and I began slowing as a pain wrapped my middle in a wicked vice grip, hobbling me. Suddenly a light illuminated us from behind, and I looked back to see it was coming from Lucas's window. The same guard I just kicked in the face yelled, "Over here, into the woods." More lights bounced around the side of the building, followed by 3 guards sprinting toward us as the flashlight beams stayed trained on our backs. We disappeared into the trees, 50 yards ahead of them, and darted through the rows, running on pure adrenaline, breath pumping and feet driving hard into the shadows. "There," I whispered, stumbling out of the far side of the woods at the exact spot where the rope was tied to the fence. "You first, don't argue." He hoisted himself easily. He was becoming more lucid by the second, temporarily winning the drug war I waged in his veins. He dropped lightly to the ground on the other side, wearing the backpack. I grabbed the highest knot I could reach and tried to lift myself up, which made pain shriek through my body and tore a groan from my throat. "What is it? What's wrong?" He reached to the fence, searching for the wound. "Don't touch it. Give me a boost." I barely said the words before his hands swept down and I stepped into them automatically, feeling the wind rush by my mask as he pushed me up into the night. I grabbed the rope and pulled, gritting my teeth. Lucas guided me from below, and I climbed to the top, wobbling precariously over the spikes as the guards broke through the trees. "Jump!" Lucas shouted, and I did, without any thought for the fall or the consequences of the ground rushing up to meet me. Lucas caught me, taking my weight easily, and carried me as he jogged across the street. The guards' shouts faded as they retreated back toward the main entrance to pursue either by foot or car, not even bothering to attempt to climb the fence. They were calling the cops if they hadn't already. "Turn here, half a block down the alley." He followed my panting instructions as I reached behind him and pulled the car keys out of the backpack. "Here, stop." He dropped me by the Chevy and opened the door. "You're hurt. I'll drive." "Nice try." I pushed him through the driver's seat and fell onto it, slammed the door closed behind us, and turned the car on, throwing it into gear and shooting out of the alley with the lights off. I took us 2 blocks down and swerved into another alley, working our way north in a zigzag pattern as police sirens blared in the distance. Pulling the ski mask off, I sucked in a deep breath of air and flicked the headlights on, slowing to a sedate 20 miles an hour as we pulled out in a completely different neighborhood and headed toward the university campus. We crested the hill past Amity Creek and Hawk Ridge, and we kept going until we were driving due north on a single country highway where the houses spread further and further apart. The clock on the dash inched toward midnight, and the more the woods took over the skyline, the more I accelerated, speeding away from the city. In Duluth, the street kids would be roaming the shipping yards looking for the next unlocked door. Jasper would be pacing the perimeter of the house, growling as the wind beat against the windows, and the downtown bars would be in full swing, ejecting the belligerent chew drunks into the chaos of downtown. I could hear the bustle and traffic, smell the water as it lapped against the shore, see the glow of red and yellow on the neon peninsula that jutted into the lake. The world I was leaving and might not see again. After another 10 minutes, the homes began receding further into the forest, distant lights shrouded in branches, and Lucas finally turned to face the front of the car. He'd spent the entire drive crouched against his seat, watching our tail for anyone in pursuit. But now he reached out and touched the dash. "This isn't your car." "No," I answered shakily, fighting against the black edges of the pain. "Butch, my dad's first mate, lent it to me. He won't find that out until they get back." "No one." The road started to fade in the headlights. "Will report it." My view of the road slipped lower and lower as I slumped against the driver's side door. Missing. The last thing I remembered before the darkness swallowed me was the jolt of the car hitting the ditch and my body slamming into the steering wheel. Okay, so that is it for now. It's the end of chapter 22. As always, comment, put your questions in there, request for the next book that I read, follow me, share this page with anyone that is interested in listening to a live reading, and I will catch you next time.